From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
I don't want, cancer to dictate what I'm going to do that day and how I'm going to live my life. I want to prove, that I'm the one still in charge.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 25th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, colorectal cancer. Joining us to talk more about it are Alan Thorson. Dr. Thorson is a clinical professor of surgery at both Creighton University School of Medicine and the University of Nebraska College of Medicine. Next to him, Ryan Shadle. Ryan is the son of the man in the opening video, here to share their inspiring story. Thank you both so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you.
Doctor, I want to start with you. How do you explain colorectal cancer to people?
So, first of all, some little understanding of colon rectum, confusion about colorectal, what does that mean? And actually, there's two different cancers. The colon is slightly different than the rectum, but it mostly is determined by just the location. So from the treatment standpoint, we make some differences, and if you were involved with a cancer like that, you'd hear about those. But both of them result from an abnormal growth of cells in the lining of the colon and the rectum. The colon is the last part of the gastrointestinal tract after the small bowel. It's where the waste is carried through after digestion has occurred in the small bowel, and the rectum is the storage area. So the lining of those two organs can form or develop abnormal tissue growth. Usually starts as a polyp, but once that starts to grow over time, it can develop into a tumor. We call it a tumor, and then a tumor just means a growth. And if that continues on, then it can become a cancer. Cancer is a growth that has the ability to spread beyond the local area. So it's a malignant. Malignant refers to the ability to spread. It's a malignant tumor growing in either the colon or the rectum.
Okay, thank you. You've devoted decades of your life to this. Why?
So it's interesting. I'm a colorectal surgeon. So just by virtue of my profession, I was treated a lot of colon and rectal cancer patients. Over the years, it became more and more obvious that these cancers were largely preventable if we treated them appropriately, if we treated through screening, basically. We know that I had mentioned that the tumor starts frequently as a polyp. So polyps take time to grow into a cancer, usually 5 to 10 years. So it gives us that great opportunity to find and remove a polyp before it becomes a cancer through screening. I saw so many patients who unfortunately developed rectal or colon cancer when I became more and more aware that that really wasn't necessary, that this could have been prevented. I saw families not ruined, but who had to go through such extensive emotional problems, financial problems, lives taken early in careers, and you just wonder what might have, how that career may have ended up if their life hadn't been taken so early. And again, because I knew it was preventable, it became kind of a issue with me that I needed to try to spread the word that we can decrease this cancer, we can avoid many of these problems that I saw so much of during my practice.
Yeah, very, very serious stuff that we're talking about. We have a graphic that we want to put up for our viewers in terms of just national facts and figures, Doctor. And I want you, as we're looking at that, to just kind of tell us what you're thinking. Second leading cancer killer.
Yeah, so colorectal cancer is the second leading cancer killer, in speaking of both men and women. Now, it's not the most common, if it's the third most common after prostate cancer in men and after breast cancer in women, but those are not as lethal a disease as colorectal is. So when talking about killers, colorectal cancer becomes the second leading cause of cancer deaths in the United States after lung cancer and smoking, with the exception of skin cancer, which is a different issue as far as incidence. But a lot of people feel when I was practiced, I knew that people would say, well, I thought a woman may come in, I thought this was just a men's disease. And it's not. It's almost equal. You can see that about 1 out of every 23 men and 1 out of every 25 women will develop colorectal cancer sometime during their lifetime. So it's really very, very common, and there are certain incredibly important steps that we need to take to avoid being one of those statistics. As you can see, nationally, it's a huge issue. 151,000 cases expected in 2022. Over 52,000 people will die of colorectal cancer this year. Again, many of these preventable if we just took the proper steps.
Thank you, Ryan. People wondering, of course, at home, when we talk about national facts and figures, they're wanting to know, how does Nebraska compare? And so we're going to put up another graphic for our viewers so you can talk us through, what does this look like in Nebraska?
Yeah, definitely. So I think in Nebraska, we're ranked 29th in screening rates, which is particularly, I guess, the lower half of the country. So we have a high colorectal cancer incidence rate, high mortality rate. There's supposed to be expected in 2022, 960 new cases and almost 320 deaths. So I think in terms of screening opportunities, there's a lot that exist out there for us.
Okay, and Ryan, how did you become introduced to colorectal cancer?
Yeah, so I was introduced through my father. He was diagnosed in 2016 at the age of 44. So very young as far as his diagnosis age was, and he was experiencing some of the more common symptoms, you would say, for colorectal cancer. And through his time, he just went to some regular doctor visits. They recommended a colonoscopy, and then from that point on, we kind of learned that he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer.
Well, I want viewers to get to know your dad and the relationship with your dad a little bit. We have a photo that we're going to be putting up for them. Tell us about your father.
Of course, yeah. So my father, he was a very brave warrior, especially when it came to cancer. He was always about supporting us and our family and doing whatever we could to continue his fight. And every day he worked to show courage, and never once said why me, why was I diagnosed with cancer. And he always worked to help others, and how do I tell my story to kind of warn others of the signs, the symptoms, and how can we improve the screening rates. And that's kind of what he had started.
And this is something that you are continuing on a national level. We want to take a look at a video here.
I'm Ryan Shadle from Omaha, Nebraska, and my connection to colorectal cancer is through my father, who was diagnosed in 2016. He was very
Ryan, as we're watching this video, I want you to talk to us a little bit about how you were selected as one of 12.
Yeah, so what had kind of occurred was Fight CRC, the national organization based in Springfield, Missouri, had been looking for what they describe as ambassadors. So every year they select a group of people who have either been survivors, caregivers, family members, those who kind of been impacted by colorectal cancer. And so what they work to do is select these people and decide, okay, how can we use them to help kind of spread the word, spread awareness, and continue the fight that many people have either lost or have just started. And for my selection, my dad was a former ambassador himself, and I worked to kind of follow in his footsteps, continue his story, and work to continue what he'd started. Like I said, he was big into kind of improving the screening rates and kind of getting the message out there about the different screening options.
I have to ask, when you do something like that on behalf of a loved one, especially in their memory, what that means to you, Ryan. I mean, if we had gone back in time and I had asked you years ago, did you ever think you'd be sitting here, right? And now you have this opportunity, right, to do this as maybe a gift to your dad. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing opportunity. It's something I would have never expected to be doing. I honestly would have expected him to be, continuing that journey himself as an ambassador. Like I said, he was the one that got us into contact with Fight CRC, and I believe that, my goal and intention was to have him doing it himself. But, once he passed away, we wanted to kind of continue that and kind of say, okay, how can we use what he started and kind of his memory to push forward and, warn others about the symptoms. Because I think one of the biggest problems we're hearing is people who have had either a family history or have had some sort of symptoms, they've been ignoring it and pushing it off, especially with kind of the recent COVID issues and things like that. So we're hoping to really kind of change the narrative as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Thorson, Ryan has mentioned a few times symptoms. And I think before we go any further, because it has been brought up, talk to us about symptoms.
So it's a very good question, a very important issue to talk about, because as Ryan said, his dad actually had some symptoms. He was also very young, 44. So he was earlier than the recommended screening age. But we know that by the time people develop symptoms, most frequently the cancer has developed into a more advanced stage, as your family experienced. So symptoms when they do occur may be just abdominal discomfort, bloating, increasing difficulty with stools, constipation. You may note blood in the stool. It could be weight loss, unexplained. So the symptoms, what I'm saying basically, are pretty vague and pretty wide. You know, those are symptoms in a 44-year-old. You would think all kinds of other things, irritable bowel, you know, something simple. But so when we taking this just a little bit step farther, symptoms are something we don't want to see. We want to be able to capture these before symptoms develop, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that when we get to screening. But that's you know, it's a great example of what symptoms mean if you have them. So.
Okay, and one of the, we will talk about screening. I do want to share, though, your dad, 44, one of the key points, and as people who are helping with this campaign and leading the effort, right, one of those points that you're really trying to drive home is we've lowered the age that we believe that people should be screened. Talk, Ryan, about not only an age, a number, but the significance of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things we're trying to work towards with this campaign is, like I said, we've gotten to lower that screening age, and I think we're also working to kind of increase the efforts on screening. I think there's many different options for screening. I think there's many different ways that people can go about getting screened, whether they're experiencing symptoms or not, and I believe that people can also, you know, help increase the funding on the government side for research and purposes, so that way we can, you know, work to advocate and make sure that maybe we can figure out other ways to lower the screening age or increase the symptoms and kind of nail down what's causing this.
I wanted to ask either of you, actually, just because you've been knee-deep in this issue, COVID. So you're wanting people to get out and get screened, and again, we'll talk about that process, but how did COVID play into this, doctor, from where you sit?
So we know that because of the COVID pandemic and the limitation on hospital services as they were overwhelmed with the COVID disease, people didn't get their screening done. We know that at this point probably about 1/3 of patients who were due for colorectal cancer screening have not been able to accomplish that. Now, I did hear some figures today to say we're starting to make some progress on gaining back on that, but a lot of people are behind, and because of that, we anticipate in the next several years we'll probably have an increase in colorectal cancer incidence across the United States.
Okay, so let's delve into the screening a little bit. Broad strokes, what is colorectal screening?
So, and we've talked some about symptoms already, so it's critically important to understand that you get screened when you don't have any symptoms, because that's when you're going to capture a cancer very early in the treatment stage, or you're going to find a polyp before a cancer even develops. So if you have symptoms, you need to be worked up for that. You need to have what we call diagnostic workup to find out what is going on. And that includes even if you're younger, and that's the difficulty we have right now. We are lowering the screening age because we know that the incidence of colorectal cancer is going up in individuals less than 50. So the screening age now is starting at 45, which still would have missed your dad, unfortunately. And so we do look at other risk factors, but get back to the question of screening. Yeah, you do that now beginning at age 45, and you can do that with a number of different ways. You can do that with colonoscopy, which is probably the most commonly understood. People think about I need to have a colonoscopy, but we learned from COVID that there are all other possible tests, and those are stool-based tests. Okay, stool-based tests look for either hidden blood in the stool or DNA in the stool, or a combination. We call it a multi-targeted stool test, looking for blood and the DNA. Those tests, during COVID, we found that quite a few people went to those tests because they couldn't get in for their colonoscopy. Those that were really pressed to get the screening done, even though they had the difficulty with colonoscopy. That gave us much more experience with the stool-based tests. We know they're very good. So if we want to talk just a little bit about the difference, colonoscopy is really more of a preventative test because it can, excuse me, it can find and remove polyps. And as mentioned, polyps are precancerous. So that if you have a colonoscopy done in a screening fashion with no symptoms, you find polyps, you can remove the polyp. Not all polyps are precancerous, but if they are, then they can be removed. And then that changes your schedule for colonoscopy afterwards. But let's just go back to screening. If you do a colonoscopy, that needs to be done once every 10 years. Assuming, again, assuming that it's just you have no risk factors. So now, like for Ryan's case, your dad had colon cancer, so he's going to be a little bit different than every 10 years, and he's going to start a little bit earlier than 45. So then the stool tests, and that needs to be done every 10 years, a colonoscopy. The stool tests, they're much more convenient. You know, colonoscopy, you have to get your colon cleaned out, which there's lots of jokes about that, and it's not nearly as bad as the jokes would imply, but it does take some time from work for a lot of people, and then having the examination also takes time from work. But it only needs to be done once every 10 years. It's preventative. Now go back to the stool tests. The blood-based stool tests need to be done every year. And if they're not done every year, they're not effective. And that's because the stool tests will find, they're more early detection tests. They look for a cancer really early when it's very treatable. So, you know, colonoscopy prevented colon cancer, stool test, early detection, so you can still treat it. But it's very convenient. You do this test at home, send it in, and get the result back. Very importantly, though, if you choose a stool test, again, it has to be done every year, or in the instance of the DNA test, every 1 to 3 years. But if you have a positive stool test, you have to be prepared to go on to a colonoscopy because the stool test is just looking for, is there any evidence? It's kind of like looking for a very, very early symptom, a symptom you wouldn't experience otherwise, but it's hidden, and you can find that hidden symptom, and then you know you need to get to that colonoscopy. If you don't go on to a colonoscopy, the risk of getting a colon cancer is very, very high within 3 to 5 years.
So, Ryan, let me ask you, with your dad, you shared that he was experiencing some symptoms. I mean, you know, one day you're all doing okay, and then the next day you're not, right?
Yes.
What happened, if you don't mind my asking, with your dad that alerted you all to the fact that something was wrong?
Yeah. So we were on actually a family vacation in Colorado, and he had been experiencing a lot of the symptoms that Dr. Thorson had been mentioning earlier, and we decided, okay, like, he needs to go to the doctor, get this kind of looked into, and we didn't think anything of it at first. But then once we kind of went and started getting some tests done, and things kind of progressed faster and faster, that's when we actually begun to learn that he had been, diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. It had spread to both his liver and his lungs from his colon. And from that point on, he had immediately started chemo, and his treatments never stopped from that point on.
Probably a good time in the interview then to make sure that people understand the importance of knowing your own body. If something is not right, sounds like your dad went in as soon as really he could, right? And then went through the diagnostic stuff that you had referenced, and then found out that it had really gone very, very quickly. When you look back, Ryan, you were talking about that family vacation. When your family looks back, was there anything prior to that you're thinking, oh yeah, I do remember Dad being this way? Or have you had those discussions? Have you been able to have them?
Yeah, I think for our family in particular, like, we had no prior history of colorectal cancer in our family. So the family history part wasn't something that kind of ever came up and never really kind of came to our minds. But once he started experiencing symptoms, and we kind of worked to almost escalate that, you could say, we really had to develop a plan from there. And like I mentioned in the beginning, my father was always a very strong and courageous man, and never once wavered from that plan, and made sure that he wouldn't show any sign of, weakness to both us or the cancer. So, we, fought that from the beginning until the end. So.
Dr. Thorson, you talked about risk factors and, Ryan now needing to go in sooner than 45. What other risk factors do we need to be aware of?
So family history is very important, and the recommendation is that if you do have a family history of a colon cancer, you actually begin screening 10 years before that family member developed their cancer. So like 44 for your dad, 34 for Ryan, okay? And then you have more frequent examinations because of that family history. Other risk factors are if you have inflammatory bowel disease, which is like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, those are increased risk of developing a colorectal cancer. So if you have family history of inflammatory bowel disease, those things for sure you need to be discussing with your physician or seeing a gastroenterologist or a colorectal surgeon to find out what should you be doing to get screened early. Okay, you don't want to wait for symptoms. Other risk factors, just more general risk factors, are obesity, physical inactivity, diabetes, smoking, excess red meat consumption. Excess is kind of a poorly defined term, but people eating red meat every day are probably at significant, some increased risk. Processed meats, luncheon meats, hot dogs, some of those meats, if you cook or barbecue things very blackened, the blackened food is an increased risk factor for colorectal cancer. So those are kind of general cancer risk factors anyway. So, but for colorectal, inflammatory bowel disease and family history are critical to make sure you know your family history and make sure your physician is aware.
So we have people thinking about this now and thinking more seriously than they probably were before they started watching this program. I am a big believer in process and really trying to help people walk through it, because this can be overwhelming, I'm sure, Ryan, as you know, in a hurry, right? Mm-hmm. So Dr. Thorson, there are people watching, and I want to reiterate what you said, 10 years before. So Ryan needs to be going in now at 34 because his father 44 when he found out. Talk about process. Where do people even begin with wanting to schedule something like this, and how do they know where to go? So
there is a program the state has that for people, for individuals who don't have health insurance, they can apply and get a stool-based screening exam. Other than that, they need to talk with their primary physician. If they don't have a primary physician, they need to get one or see one. Or if they have access to a gastroenterologist or a colorectal surgeon, they can always make an appointment and visit with them about the appropriateness for screening at whatever their situation is with family history, personal history of inflammatory bowel disease, or just age, 45, and when should you start screening.
And you said every 10 years.
For colonoscopy, it's every 10 years. Now, if you find polyps, you're going to start having to have colonoscopy more frequently. But for somebody who has no symptoms and has no increased risk factors, a colonoscopy once every 10 years, a stool-based test every 1 year for the blood-based tests, and for the DNA, 1 to 3 years.
Dr. Thorson, you've been doing this a really long time, and I have to ask, what is the most commonly asked question that you receive in terms of this topic?
It's a really good question.
What do people wonder the most about? What's the most confusing? What's the most clear?
I think that probably, I'm not, depending upon the perspective of where this question comes up, if it's from a patient, a lot of times it's well, why did this happen? What should I have done something differently? And I've had patients say, I've done all these things you talk about, the risk factors, I've ate well, blah, blah, et cetera, and I still have a colon cancer. Why is that? And in that instance, these things don't prevent any, they're not wholly preventable, but in some of those cases, if they hadn't done those things, they might have had 2 cancers by now. You don't know. So you always try to look at the more positive aspect if there is one to be found. I guess that's probably the most common. Other than that is, how do we treat this now?
Okay,
That'd be the next one. Yeah.
Thank you. Ryan, we have about a minute remaining. You're going to be talking an awful lot about this subject moving forward. What would you like to share with our viewers now?
Yeah, I would just say that, if you're experiencing any of the symptoms we talked about today, or you're looking for more resources or opportunities to learn about any of the things we discussed, I would, look at some of the resources we've provided at fightcrc.org, and then also, check out the campaign and just make sure you talk about your family history to your loved ones, because it can really save a lot of people's lives, and just never ignore your symptoms.
Briefly, the importance of support. Talk about that, Ryan.
Yeah, I think support was one of the biggest things for our family. We never once stopped talking to each other. We had open lines of communication, and we just made sure that, we each talked to each other every single day, made sure we knew that we loved each other, and then just made sure that, the support was always there and it never ended, and it still hasn't.
Okay, talking with Ryan Shadle and Dr. Alan Thorson today about colorectal cancer. If people want more information, I do want to show them some websites and a phone number: cdc.gov/cancer/colorectal, fightbackne.org, or 800-532-2227. Thank you both so much for being here, for sharing your time and expertise. Best wishes moving forward.
Thank you.
Very, very good thing you're doing for your dad.
Thank you.
Thank our students for working so hard behind the scenes, and of course to all of you for watching. As we close, a look at Midtown Omaha as seen through the lens of Dee Warren, a junior at UNO. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.